sat alone in the Galactic Archive, a cold and quiet room buried deep beneath the surface of a world that no longer had a name anyone cared to remember. She pressed the recording button and stared into the small light on the device. She had been asked to record the history of the war, not the version the politicians told, not the version the hegemony survivors whispered in shame, the real one. The one that started long before the first shot was fired. She took a breath and began. "If you want to understand why the galaxy burned," she said, "you must first understand what humans are, and what we did to them." 120 years before the war, humanity had stepped out of its small solar system and made contact with the galactic hegemony. The hegemony was an alliance of 34 species that controlled most of the known galaxy. They had faster ships, better weapons, and technology that humans could only dream of. When the humans arrived, the hegemony welcomed them the way a rich family welcomes a stray dog. They smiled and gave them a seat at the table, but it was the smallest seat, in the farthest corner, and the food was always cold. Humans were given limited trade rights. They could colonize only the worlds nobody else wanted. They were banned from buying advanced medical technology, advanced weapons, and the best faster-than-light engines. The hegemony said these restrictions were for safety and stability, but everyone knew the truth. Humans were not considered equals. They were considered animals who had somehow learned to build starships. The insults came slowly at first, then faster. Hegemony news channels ran programs mocking human culture. They called humans the short-lived ones, because human lifespans were barely a century, while most hegemony species lived for 300 years or more. They made jokes about human emotions, about how humans cried at music and held hands with their children. They said these things made humans weak. When human traders tried to expand their business, the hegemony created new regulations that blocked them. When human colonies grew too large, the hegemony forced relocations, moving thousands of families to worse planets with fewer resources. When humans complained, the hegemony smiled and said, "These are the rules. Everyone must follow them." But the rules only ever seemed to apply to humans. Through all of this, humanity did something that confused the galaxy. They did nothing. They filed complaints through proper channels. They sent diplomats to negotiate. They wrote letters and made speeches and asked politely for fairness. They never raised a fist. They never raised a weapon. They just kept asking. The galaxy thought this meant humans were afraid. Deep inside Earth's government, in a room that officially did not exist, a man named Park Do-hyun sat at a long table, surrounded by generals and leaders. Do-hyun was not a soldier. He was a thinker. He was thin and quiet, and he wore glasses that he constantly pushed up his nose, and he had the kind of calm voice that made people lean forward to listen. He had spent 30 years studying every species in the hegemony, their strengths, their weaknesses, their fears, and their blind spots. "Let them believe we are tame," Do-hyun told the room. "The longer they underestimate us, the more rope they give us to hang them with." His plan was simple and terrifying. Humanity would not fight today. Humanity would prepare. Quietly, carefully, and completely. They would build ships in secret. They would plant intelligence agents across the galaxy, disguised as merchants and workers and translators. They would steal technology and improve it. They would map every weakness in the hegemony's armor, and they would wait. The plan was called the Doctrine of Delayed Retaliation, and it had one core rule: never strike in anger. Strike only when you can end it. 80 years passed. Human ships were built in hidden shipyards, deep in empty space where no one ever looked. Human agents sent back information every day. Human scientists quietly surpassed the technology they had been banned from buying. And through it all, humanity kept smiling at the galaxy, kept filing complaints, kept asking nicely. The galaxy kept laughing. Then came New Incheon. New Incheon was a human colony world on the outer edge of a disputed sector. It was a peaceful place, farmers, teachers, families. The colony had a population of 40,000, and its biggest event each year was the Harvest Festival, where children performed dances and families ate together under the open sky. Chancellor Vorel, the leader of the hegemony, decided that New Inchenon was too close to hegemony territory. He called it a security concern. He authorized a peacekeeping operation to remove the colony. He gave the order to Admiral Tessin, a tall and proud military commander who had never lost a battle and who considered humans to be barely worth his attention. Tessin did not send ground troops. He did not issue a warning. He brought his fleet into orbit above New Inchenon on the day of the Harvest Festival and opened fire. The bombardment lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, 13,000 people were dead. Entire neighborhoods were flattened. The festival grounds were a crater. A school, where children had been practicing their dance for the celebration, was nothing but ash and silence. The news reached Earth 6 hours later. Commander Yoon Tae-ho, the Supreme Commander of the United Earth Defense Force, received the casualty report in his office. He was a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and steady hands that had never shaken in his life. He read the report from beginning to end. He read the names. He read the descriptions of the damage. He read about the school. He set the report down on his desk. His aide, a young officer standing near the door, waited in silence for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Sir, what is our response?" Tae-ho looked at her. His face was calm. His eyes were not. "Send the formal declaration," he said. That evening, every government, every species, and every leader in the galaxy received the same message. It was short. It was written in every known language. It said, "The United Earth Defense Force formally declares a state of war against the galactic hegemony. This declaration is effective immediately. There will be no further warnings." For the first time in 120 years of galactic contact, humanity had stopped asking nicely. And the galaxy, for the first time, felt something it had never felt toward humans before: fear. The declaration of war arrived on every screen in the galaxy at the same time, and the galaxy did what it always did when humans tried to be serious. It laughed. Chancellor Vorel read the message in his private chamber, leaned back in his chair, and deleted it. He did not call an emergency meeting. He did not alert his military commanders. He simply sent a short note to Admiral Tessin that said, "The animals are barking. Let them tire themselves out." Tessin received the note and smiled. He was sitting aboard his flagship, a massive warship called the Unbroken Will, surrounded by officers who had spent their entire careers winning easy battles against weaker species. Tessin held a press conference that same day. He stood before the cameras and said, with a grin that showed all his teeth, "Humanity has declared war on the hegemony. This is like a child declaring war on the ocean. We will wash over them, and they will learn their place." The hegemony's news channels played the clip on repeat. Commentators joked about it. One popular host said humans would surrender within a week once they realized they were outgunned. Another said the whole thing was probably a mistake, and that humans were too emotional to make rational military decisions. The audience laughed along. But Laura did not laugh. Laura was attending a diplomatic reception on the hegemony's capital station 3 days after the declaration. She moved through the crowd of ambassadors and officials, all of them drinking and talking and treating the war like entertainment. She noticed something that stopped her cold. She looked around the room, then looked again. Then she checked the guest list. Every human was gone. Not just from the party, from the station. She made calls. She checked port records. Every human ship that had been docked at hegemony stations across the galaxy had departed. Every human merchant, every human translator, every human engineer working on hegemony worlds had quietly packed up and left. It had happened in less than 48 hours. Thousands of humans, scattered across dozens of systems, had vanished without a sound, without a panic, without a single one of them saying goodbye. It was coordinated, it was precise, and it terrified her. She tried to warn the hegemony officials at the party. She pulled aside a senior advisor and told him what she had noticed. He shrugged and said, "Good. Less mess to clean up when we win." Laura walked away from that conversation with a knot in her stomach that would not go away for months. What the galaxy did not know, what it could not have known, was that the disappearance of humans from hegemony space was not a retreat. It was the first move of a plan that had been in motion for 80 years. Deep inside Earth's intelligence headquarters, a woman named Shin Nari sat in a dark room filled with screens. Nari was the director of human intelligence operations, and she was the most dangerous person in the galaxy, though no one outside Earth knew her name. She was small, quiet, and had a face that people forgot the moment they looked away. This was, in many ways, her greatest weapon. For decades, Nari had been running the largest intelligence operation in galactic history. Every human who worked in hegemony space, every merchant who traded in alien ports, every translator who sat in alien meetings had been part of her network. They were not all spies in the traditional sense. Most of them were ordinary people living ordinary lives, but they all had one thing in common, and they reported what they heard. Over 80 years, Nari's network had mapped every hegemony communication relay, every fleet patrol route, every supply chain, every political alliance, and every secret. She knew which admirals hated each other. She knew which species were quietly unhappy with hegemony rule. She knew the access codes for 16 critical communication stations. She knew where the fuel was stored, where the ships were built, and where the weaknesses were hidden. She knew everything, and she had been waiting for the order to use it. The order came from Commander Tejo himself. One word: begin. Nari's fingers moved across her console, and the war began not with an explosion, but with silence. At exactly the same moment, across 3 sectors of hegemony space, 16 communication relay stations went dark. These were not small outposts. They were the backbone of the hegemony's military network. Massive stations that carried orders from command to fleet, from fleet to ground forces, from one end of the empire to the other. Nari's agents had planted dormant programs inside these stations years ago, hidden inside routine software updates that no one had ever thought to check. Now those programs activated, and the stations simply stopped working. The hegemony military lost contact with half its fleet in an instant. 11 hours of total communication blackout. Admirals could not reach their captains. Captains could not reach their crews. Orders sent into the void came back as nothing. Panic spread faster than any warship could fly. Meanwhile, in the deep black of unexplored space, Captain Kang Jisoo stood on the bridge of the battleship Silent Fury and watched the chaos unfold on her tactical display. The Silent Fury was one of 400 warships that the galaxy did not know existed. They had been built in secret, in shipyards hidden inside asteroid fields and gas clouds, places where no hegemony patrol had ever thought to look. Each ship was armed with weapons that were 2 generations ahead of anything the hegemony had, built from stolen blueprints that human engineers had quietly improved upon for decades. Jisoo was 38 years old, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation among her crew for being impossible to surprise. She had trained for this moment for 15 years. Her crew was restless. They had watched the footage from New Incheon. They had seen the crater where the school used to be. They wanted blood. Jisoo understood their anger. She felt it herself, deep in her chest, like a fire that never went out. But she had learned long ago that anger was a tool, not a master. She turned to face her crew and said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the bridge, "We do not get to be angry yet. Anger is for after we have won. Right now, We have a job, and we are going to do it perfectly." The crew straightened. The fire in their eyes did not go out, but it became focused, controlled, like a blade being sharpened. Back on the Hegemony flagship, Admiral Tessin stood in his command center and stared at screens that showed nothing. No signals, no fleet positions, no responses to his orders. The great warship that had never known defeat was floating blind in friendly space, unable to talk to anyone. An aide approached him carefully and whispered, "Sir, they are not attacking us. They are blinding us." Tessin said nothing. He stood very still, and for the first time in his long and decorated career, the smile was gone from his face. In its place was something he had never felt before and did not yet have a name for. Later he would learn its name. It was called dread. The galaxy expected humans to fight the way animals fight, wild, loud, and reckless. They expected firebombs on cities and clumsy charges into battle lines. They expected rage. What they got instead was something far more unsettling. They got precision. It began 72 hours after the communication blackout. The Hegemony was still scrambling to restore its relay stations when humanity struck, not once, but everywhere at the same time. In the Kessler sector, 3 Hegemony fuel depots exploded in perfect sequence, each blast timed exactly 4 minutes apart. The depots supplied fuel to an entire fleet group. Without them, 47 warships were stranded with nowhere to refuel. In the Voss corridor, human stealth ships appeared out of nowhere and blockaded the 3 narrowest choke points of the Hegemony's most important trade route. Nothing could get in or out. In the Harlan Reach, a fleet of human destroyers dropped out of faster-than-light travel, directly on top of the Hegemony's largest shipyard, and disabled it with targeted strikes to its construction docks. Not destroyed, disabled. The workers inside were unharmed. The yard simply could not build anything anymore. All of this happened in a single day. And the most terrifying part was what humanity did not hit. They did not touch a single city. They did not bomb a single home. They did not fire on a single civilian transport. Every target was military or industrial. Every strike was calculated to cause maximum damage to the Hegemony's ability to fight, while causing zero harm to ordinary people. The galaxy noticed, and the galaxy did not know what to make of it. On the ground, the war was just as precise. Sergeant Han Minho led a Marine unit back to New Incheon, the colony where 13,000 people had died under Hegemony bombardment. The Hegemony had left a garrison there, a few hundred soldiers occupying the ruins of a place they had destroyed. Minho's orders were simple: take it back. Minho was 29 years old, built like a wall, and had a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. But his eyes were soft, and the soldiers under his command knew that behind the hard exterior was a man who still kept a picture of his little sister in his vest pocket. His sister had been a teacher. She had worked at a school on a colony not unlike New Incheon. The war was personal for him in ways he did not talk about. His unit landed at dawn. The Hegemony garrison expected savages. They had been told the humans fought like wild animals, charging head-on, screaming, dying in waves. What they got instead was silence, then confusion, then defeat. Minho's Marines moved through the ruins like ghosts. They used electronic warfare to jam the garrison's communications. They flanked from 3 directions at once. They breached the garrison's compound using shaped charges that blew open doors without collapsing walls. The fighting lasted less than 2 hours. When it was over, every Hegemony soldier was either captured or had surrendered. Not one was executed. Not one was beaten. Minho's medics treated the wounded aliens alongside wounded humans. The garrison commander, a tall officer with 4 arms and a deep cut across his face, sat on the ground with his hands bound and stared at the human who had just offered him water. "Why?" the commander asked. We destroyed your colony. We killed your people. Why are you giving me water? Minho looked at him for a long moment. We are not here because we hate you, he said. We are here because you killed our kids. The commander had no answer for that. While Minho retook New Incheon, Director Shin Nari launched the second phase of her operation. For decades, her intelligence network had been recording hegemony communications. Not just military ones, but personal ones, political ones, and secret ones. She had recordings of Chancellor Varel giving the direct order to bombard New Incheon. She had recordings of him laughing about it afterward. She had recordings of Admiral Tessin calling humans useful pests and suggesting that more colonies should be cleaned. Nari released all of it. Every recording, every transcript, every secret conversation, broadcast on every open channel in the galaxy simultaneously. The effect was immediate and devastating. Species that had been loyal to the hegemony for centuries heard their leaders mocking them behind closed doors. Neutral species that had stayed quiet heard Varel dismissing their concerns as irrelevant. 3 minor species withdrew from the hegemony within a week. 5 more began secret negotiations with humanity. The hegemony was not just losing the military war, it was losing the story. Admiral Tessin, desperate to prove that the hegemony was still powerful, gathered the largest fleet he could assemble and launched a massive counterattack against a human forward position in the Daehan system. He brought 600 warships, more firepower than most species had ever seen in one place. He expected to crush the human defenders and turn the tide of the war. The battle lasted 9 hours. Tessin's fleet outnumbered the human defenders 3-1. By every calculation, by every model, by every rule of galactic warfare, he should have won easily. But humans did not fight by the galaxy's rules. Human ships took hits that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. Crews rerouted power from non-essential systems, patched hull breaches with emergency foam, and fired back with weapons that hit harder than anything Tessin had ever faced. When one human ship lost its main engines, its captain used maneuvering thrusters to spin the ship around and ram it into a hegemony cruiser's engine block, disabling both ships but saving her crew. When another human ship ran out of missiles, its crew launched cargo containers filled with scrap metal at enemy sensors, blinding them long enough for Allied ships to close in. Tessin won the battle, technically. The human defenders eventually pulled back, but Tessin lost 212 ships doing it. A third of his fleet, gone, against a force a fraction of his size. His officers looked at the casualty reports in stunned silence. Tessin sent a private message to Chancellor Varel that night. It said, "They do not break. We hit them and they just adapt. I need reinforcements. I need them now." Varel did not respond for 3 days. While the politicians hesitated, she stood before the neutral coalition, a gathering of species that had refused to take sides, and gave the speech that would later be called the turning point of the war. "Look at how they fight," she said. "Look at their targets. Fuel, ships, shipyards, infrastructure. They are not burning worlds. They are not slaughtering civilians. They are taking apart the hegemony's ability to make war, piece by piece, without destroying its people. This is not rage. This is not revenge. This is something far more frightening." She paused and let the silence fill the room. "This is patience. And if you think patience is not dangerous, then you have not been paying attention." That night, Commander Yoon Tae-ho sat alone in his office on Earth, reviewing reports. The war was going well. The hegemony was bleeding from 1,000 small cuts. An aide entered and suggested that now was the time to press the advantage, to strike at hegemony homeworlds and end it quickly. Tae-ho shook his head slowly. "We are not them," he said. "We win by being better, not by being cruel." He turned back to his reports, and his voice dropped low. "But if they force our hand, we will end this in a way they remember for 1,000 years." The aide left the room quietly and closed the door behind her. In the silence that followed, Taeho picked up the casualty list from New Inshan and read the names again, as he did every night. 13,000 names. He knew he could not memorize them all, but he tried anyway, because someone had to remember, and because remembering was the only thing that kept the fire in his chest from turning into something he could not control. The war had been going on for 6 weeks, and the hegemony was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, the way a great tree dies when someone quietly cuts its roots one by one. Supply lines were broken. Fleets were stranded in systems they could not leave because there was no fuel to carry them home. Trade had collapsed. The economy of an empire that had ruled for centuries was falling apart, and every day brought new reports of another species pulling away, another alliance crumbling, another commander surrendering to human forces and being treated better than his own government had ever treated him. Chancellor Vorel sat in his chamber and watched his empire shrink on the map in front of him. Every day, the borders pulled inward. Every day, the color that represented hegemony control got smaller. He had not slept properly in weeks. His advisors told him to negotiate, to seek peace terms, to cut his losses. But Vorel was not the kind of leader who accepted defeat. He was the kind of leader who would rather burn everything down than admit he had been wrong. And so, he made the worst decision in the history of the galaxy. He called his chief scientist into his chamber and gave an order that made even the scientist hesitate. Vorel authorized the use of Compound 17, a biological weapon that had been banned by galactic treaty for 300 years. It was a plague, engineered to attack specific biology. It could be tuned to target any species. Vorel tuned it to target humans. 3 canisters were deployed on 3 human colony worlds, Sejong, Hana, and Miryang. The delivery was disguised as routine atmospheric debris. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the plague was already spreading. People started coughing, then bleeding, then dying. Within 4 days, 200,000 humans were infected. Within 10 days, the death toll passed 30,000 and was climbing fast. Hospitals on all 3 worlds were overwhelmed. Children died in their parents' arms. Doctors worked until they collapsed. The plague moved through human populations like fire through dry grass, and there was no cure. The news hit Earth like a hammer blow. People who had supported the war with calm determination suddenly felt something much darker. Grief turned to fury. Protests erupted in every city. People demanded total retaliation. They wanted hegemony worlds burned to ash. They wanted revenge. But Commander Yoon Taeho did not give them revenge. Not yet. Director Shin Nari's intelligence network had intercepted the deployment orders within hours of the first outbreak. Her analysts traced the bioweapon back to its origin, a secret laboratory on a hegemony military station, and then traced the authorization directly to Vorel himself. She had the evidence. She had his signature. She had recordings of him discussing the deployment with his scientists. She had everything. She brought the evidence to Taeho in person. She walked into his office, set the data on his desk, and said nothing. She did not need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. 30,000 dead and rising. A banned weapon. A direct order from the Chancellor. Taeho read the report. He read it again. He set it down and closed his eyes. The room was very quiet. Nari watched his face and saw something she had never seen there before. She had seen him calm. She had seen him focused. She had seen him tired. But she had never seen him like this. His jaw was tight. His hands, which had never shaken, were pressed flat against the desk as if he was holding something down. When he opened his eyes, they were different. The patience was still there, but it was no longer soft. It was the patience of a man who had made a decision he could not take back. "Activate Protocol Songbird," he said. Nari nodded once and left the room. Protocol Songbird was Park Do-hyun's masterpiece, and it was the one plan he had prayed they would never need. It was not a single weapon. It was not a single attack. It was a complete and simultaneous dismantling of everything the hegemony needed to exist. Every military base, every command center, every fuel reserve, every communication hub, every shipyard, every political headquarters, all of it targeted at once across the entire galaxy in a single coordinated strike designed to break the hegemony so completely that it could never function again. Not to kill its people, to kill its power. 400 human warships that the galaxy still did not fully understand emerged from hidden positions across hegemony space. They had been waiting, engines cold, systems dark, for exactly this moment. Now they came alive, and the galaxy saw the true size of what humanity had built in the shadows. Captain Kang Jisoo led the spearhead. Her target was the hegemony's capital system, defended by the largest armada ever assembled. 800 warships gathered around the seat of hegemony power. It was the most heavily defended position in the galaxy. Jisoo brought 120 ships. The battle began at dawn, capital time. It was not a battle, it was a storm. Human ships hit the hegemony defense fleet with weapons and tactics that no one had ever seen before. Electronic warfare blinded half the hegemony ships in the first 10 minutes. Human destroyers moved in pairs, covering each other with overlapping fire, while nimble frigates darted between enemy formations and struck at engines and weapon systems. The hegemony fought back with everything they had, and they fought hard, but they were fighting an enemy that had studied them for 80 years and knew every move they would make before they made it. Jisoo's ship, the Silent Fury, took a direct hit to its main bridge. The explosion killed 6 of her officers and threw her into a wall hard enough to crack 2 ribs. She pulled herself up, blood running down her face, and limped to the backup command console. She strapped herself in and kept fighting. Her transmission went out to every human ship in the battle. Her voice was rough with pain, but steady as iron. "All ships, this is Kang Jisoo. They poisoned our children. We do not forgive, we do not forget, but we do not become them. Disable their ships, spare their crews, and make sure they never threaten anyone again." The human fleet obeyed. They fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, fierce and fast and relentless. But every shot was aimed at engines, at weapons, at systems. Not at crew quarters, not at life support, not at escape pods. When hegemony ships went dead in space, human ships moved past them and let their crews live. Admiral Tessen's flagship, the Unbroken Will, held out longer than any other ship in the defense fleet. Tessen fought with everything he had, and in another war, against another enemy, he might have been a hero. But his ship was hit 17 times, and on the 18th hit, the engines died. The great warship drifted, dark and powerless, in the silence of space. Sergeant Han Minho led the boarding team. His Marines cut through the airlock and moved through the ship with the same quiet efficiency they had shown on New Incheon. They found Tessen on his bridge, standing among the wreckage of his command, his uniform burned and torn, a weapon in his hand. Minho raised his own weapon. Tessen stared at him. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Minho lowered his rifle. He reached into his pack, pulled out a bottle of water, and held it out. "Sit down, Admiral," he said. "The war is over for you." Tessen stared at the water. His hand shook. He lowered his weapon, and something in his face collapsed. Not anger, not defiance, something deeper. Something that looked like a man realizing that everything he had believed about his enemy was wrong. "Why?" Tessin whispered. "Why do you not kill me?" Minho looked at him with those soft eyes that did not match his soldier's body. "Because that is what you would do," he said. Tessin took the water. He sat down on the floor of his broken bridge, and he drank. Across the galaxy, Protocol Songbird completed its work. Every hegemony military installation went dark. Every command hub fell silent. Every shipyard stopped. The empire that had ruled for centuries was in a single day stripped of everything that made it powerful. And in his private chamber, Chancellor Vorel sat alone and watched his screens go black, one by one, like stars going out. The last screen to die showed the human fleet, holding position around his capital, weapons powered down, waiting. They were not firing. They were just waiting. And somehow, that was worse. The hegemony did not surrender with a grand ceremony or a signed document. It simply stopped existing. There was no one left to give the order, no system left to carry it, and no fleet left to enforce it. The empire that had ruled 34 species for centuries dissolved like salt in water, quietly and completely, until there was nothing left but the memory of what it had been. Across the galaxy, hegemony fleets drifted without fuel. Governors of distant systems woke up to find that the government they served no longer answered their calls. Some panicked. Some tried to seize local power. Most simply opened their doors and waited for whatever came next. What came next was not what anyone expected. Human ships arrived at former hegemony worlds, not with weapons aimed, but with cargo bays open. They brought food, medical supplies, engineers, and construction materials. They helped restore power grids that their own attacks had disabled. They repaired communication relays. They treated wounded soldiers from both sides in the same hospitals. The species that had spent a century mocking humanity watched in confused silence as humans rebuilt what they had broken. Chancellor Vorel was found in his chamber 3 days after Protocol Songbird. He had not moved. He had not eaten. He sat in his chair, surrounded by dark screens, and stared at nothing. When the human soldiers came for him, he did not resist. He did not speak. He simply stood up and walked with them, like a man who had already died, and was just waiting for his body to notice. He was brought before a joint tribunal made up of human judges and representatives from the neutral species that had refused to support the hegemony. The trial lasted 11 days. The evidence was overwhelming. Vorel's own words, his own orders, his own recordings, condemned him more effectively than any prosecutor could. The bombardment of New Incheon, the biological weapon, the decades of oppression disguised as policy, all of it laid bare for the galaxy to see. The tribunal found him guilty on every count. The sentence was not death. Park Do-hyun, who had designed humanity's war doctrine, had also designed this punishment. Vorel was sentenced to live the rest of his natural life on New Incheon, the colony he had ordered destroyed, now being rebuilt by the families of the people he had killed. He would live among them. He would see their faces every day. He would watch their children grow up in the shadow of the memorial that bore 13,000 names. He would live, and he would remember, and he would never be allowed to forget. When the sentence was read, Vorel finally spoke. He said only one word. Why? The human judge looked at him and said, "Because killing you would be easy, and we have never chosen the easy path." While the tribunal proceeded, human scientists were fighting a different battle. The bioweapon that Vorel had unleashed on Sejong, Hana, and Miryang was still killing people. The death toll had passed 60,000. Families were being torn apart. Entire communities were quarantined. The plague was the cruelest weapon the galaxy had ever seen, and stopping it was the most urgent task humanity had ever faced. Director Shin Nari, coordinated the effort. She reached out to every species in the galaxy, including former hegemony members, and asked for help. She did not demand it, she asked. Scientists from 12 different species answered. They worked alongside human researchers in laboratories that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They shared knowledge that had never been shared across species lines before. They argued, they collaborated, they failed, and they tried again. 6 weeks after the first outbreak, they found the cure. And then humanity did something that made the entire galaxy stop and stare. They shared it. Not just the cure for the human-targeted version of the plague. They modified the cure to work against any variant of the bioweapon, protecting every carbon-based species in the galaxy. They sent the formula to every world, every station, every ship. Free. No conditions. No payment, no strings. Laura was there when the announcement was made. She stood in the back of a crowded room and listened as a human doctor explained that the cure was available to everyone, immediately, without restriction. Around her, diplomats and officials from species that had spent decades treating humans as lesser beings sat in stunned silence. Some of them had tears in their eyes, though they would never admit it. Later, in her recording for the archive, Laura said they could have kept it. They could have used it as leverage. They could have let the galaxy fear the next plague and begged for human protection. Instead, they healed everyone, every species, even the ones that had laughed at them, even the ones that had hurt them. That was the moment I understood what humans truly are. They are not warriors. They are not conquerors. They are stubborn, impossible, infuriating people who refuse to let the universe make them cruel. The months that followed were not easy. Wars never end cleanly, no matter who wins. There were disputes, and resentments, and old wounds that would take generations to heal. But slowly, carefully, a new order took shape. The Galactic Hegemony was replaced by the Galactic Council, a body where every species, no matter how small or how new, had an equal seat and an equal voice. Humanity did not demand leadership. They took their seat beside everyone else and said, "Let us build something better." Technology that the hegemony had hoarded for centuries was shared freely. Medical advances, faster-than-light engines. The galaxy, for the first time in its history, began to look like a community instead of an empire. Sergeant Han Minho went home. He took a transport back to New Incheon, where construction crews were rebuilding the colony from the ground up. New homes, new schools, new roads. The festival grounds had been turned into a memorial park, a quiet space with trees and water and a long wall made of white stone. On the wall, 13,000 names were carved, one for every person who had died in the bombardment. Minho walked to the wall alone. He stood in front of it for a long time, reading the names. He found the names of children. He found the names of teachers. He found the names of families. He stood there until the sun began to set, and the light turned golden, and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the grass. And then, for the first time since the war began, he let himself cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a soldier. The deep, shaking sobs of a man who had held everything inside for too long and could not hold it any more. He cried for the dead. He cried for the living. He cried because the war was over and he had survived it, and he did not know if he deserved to. A small child, a girl no older than 6, who was playing nearby, walked over to him. She did not say anything. She simply held out a flower, a small yellow one she had picked from the edge of the park. Minho took it gently and placed it at the base of the wall. He wiped his eyes and looked at the child and managed a small broken smile. "Thank you," he said. The girl smiled back and ran away to play. Captain Kong Jisoo was promoted to admiral. At the ceremony, held on the rebuilt deck of the Silent Fury, she stood before her crew and the gathered officers of the fleet, and gave a speech that lasted less than 2 minutes. I did not fight for rank, or medals, or history books. I fought so that no one in this galaxy would ever again look at a human being and think our lives are cheap. If you take nothing else from this war, take this. We were kind, and they mistook it for weakness. We will continue to be kind, but we will never be weak. Commander Yun Taeho retired from military service on a quiet Tuesday. There was no parade. He asked that there not be one. He gave his final address in the same office where he had read the casualty report from New Incheon, standing in the same spot, behind the same desk. We did not want this war, he said. We spent a century trying to avoid it. We asked for peace. We asked for fairness. We asked to be treated like equals. And when they answered with fire, we answered with everything we had, not with hatred, with resolve. Let the galaxy remember this. Humanity does not start wars, but we finish them. He saluted, and then he walked out of the office and into the sunlight, and he did not look back. Laura finished her recording on a cold evening in the archive. The lights were low. The room was empty. She had been talking for hours, and her voice was tired but steady. She looked into the lens one final time. The galaxy made many mistakes with humanity, she said. We mocked them. We robbed them. We restricted them. We killed their children. And through all of it, they were patient. They warned us, again and again, in every language, through every channel, with every tool they had. We did not listen. And when they finally rose, when they finally showed us what they were truly capable of, they did not destroy us. They saved us. From the hegemony, from our own arrogance, from ourselves. She paused and took a breath. That is the terrifying truth about humans. It is not their strength, though their strength is great. It is not their endurance, though they endure beyond reason. It is that even after everything we did to them, after a century of cruelty and a war we forced upon them, they still chose mercy. And that, more than any weapon they ever built, is why no one will ever cross them again. She reached forward and pressed the button to stop the recording. The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, a single line of text appeared on the archive's display. The final entry in the record of the war, written by no one and attributed to everyone. Earth remembers, Earth forgives, but Earth never forgets.